Today, we have a series of 5 scary, 100% true Skinwalker stories sent to us from our eyewitness sources. Also, remember you can send me your stories at truehauntinglog@gmail.com so I can narrate them and you can listen to them too. They say that there are places in this world where the rules of reality do not apply. You might feel safe in your home. You might feel safe in your car. But some things have been walking this earth long before we built our cities. Things that can wear the skin of an animal like a suit. Things that can steal your voice to lure you into the dark. You are about to listen to a collection of Skinwalker and shapeshifter encounters that will make you rethink the safety of the night. Witnesses who stared into the abyss and saw something smiling back. One warning: once you hear their stories, they might start listening to yours. Welcome back to the True Haunting Log. Tonight, we are unlocking the archives to bring you a specific curation of fear. We have compiled 5 alleged eyewitness accounts of skinwalkers, fleshgaits, and creatures that defy explanation. These stories come from real people, ranchers, hikers, and drivers who faced the impossible. Make sure you are comfortable. Lock your doors. And if you appreciate this content, please hit that like button to help us survive the algorithm. Now, let's begin. Story 1. Barn Creature from Nightingale. Even now, decades later, I can still vividly recall that terrifying summer night when I was only 10 years old. It was during my annual visit to my grandparents' ranch in rural New Mexico. I always looked forward to those trips, the wide open spaces, helping Grandpa with the animals, and listening to Grandma's stories by the fireplace. But that particular visit in the summer of 1979 is seared into my memory for a very different reason. My grandparents' ranch was isolated, surrounded by vast stretches of rugged wilderness where the silence was so heavy it felt like a physical weight. The nearest town was an hour's drive away. Out there, it felt like we were in our own little world. But even as a kid, I could sense an undercurrent of something strange and unsettling in that lonely landscape. Grandpa and Grandma often spoke in hushed tones about odd happenings in the area, glancing out the windows as if expecting to see something staring back. But one evening, as we sat around the dinner table, the tension broke. Grandpa cleared his throat, the sound loud in the quiet kitchen, and said, "You know, over the past few months, several of our sheep and cattle have disappeared without a trace." Grandma nodded, her face grave and pale. "It's the strangest thing. No signs of animal attacks or rustlers. No blood, no struggle. They're just gone." I looked up from my plate. My curiosity piqued, but my stomach was tightening. "What do you think happened to them, Grandpa?" He shook his head, a deep frown etched into his weathered features. "I wish I knew, kiddo. I've been ranching these parts for over 50 years and I ain't ever seen anything like it." Grandma leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made the hair on my arms stand up. And that's not all. On moonless nights, when the ranch is pitch black and silent as a tomb, sometimes I hear these eerie, almost man-like cries and whispers coming from the woods that border the pasture land. "Really? What do they sound like?" I asked, barely breathing. She shuddered, visibly. "It's hard to describe. They're not quite animal, but not quite human either. It's like they're speaking in some strange, twisted language, mimicking words they don't understand. And the sounds, well, they seem to carry on the wind coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. It's enough to make your blood run cold." Grandpa chimed in, his voice grim. "I've heard him too, and then there are the tracks." tracks?" I asked. A few weeks back, I was out mending a fence on the edge of the property. As I was walking the line, I came across these bizarre footprints in the dirt. They were vaguely human, but there was something off about them. The toes were too long, almost like claws, and the spacing was all wrong, like whatever made them walk like they were neither man nor animal. "Oh, I remember that day," Grandma added, clutching her napkin. "You came back to the house as white as a sheet." "Yup, I followed those tracks for a while. They, LED, straight off into the wilderness. They got fainter and fainter till they just vanished without a trace. It was like whatever made them just evaporated." A heavy silence fell over the table. I felt goosebumps rising on my arms despite the warmth of the kitchen. I was wondering why my grandparents were trying to scare me like this, or were they trying to warn me? He turned to me, his eyes serious. "You be careful out there, you hear? Stick close to the house after dark, and if you see or hear anything strange, you come right back and tell us, okay?" I nodded, a lump in my throat beginning to form. I was beginning to realize they really weren't trying to scare me. They feared something was out here on this land and wanted me to know about it. You often hear stories like this where the adults know something the kids don't, and instead of explaining what it might be and warning them to stay clear, they simply say, "Be careful," or "Steer clear of such and such place," with no explanation. Well, you know what a kid's gonna do when they hear that. They're not going to take the warning seriously. Added scary explanation to their warning really made me listen that night. And it all came to a head on a sweltering evening in late July. The sun had just slipped below the hills, and the first stars were blinking into existence. Grandpa was working on a busted tractor and asked me to fetch a wrench from the barn. I didn't want to go alone in the dark, but I didn't want to look like a scaredy cat in front of Grampy, so I reluctantly agreed. Plus, it was just the barn. It wasn't terribly far away from the house. Surely nothing bad could happen that close. Is less than hay shown. 5 hash is greater than, and yet, somehow, the walk to the barn seemed to take forever. An eerie silence hung over the ranch, broken only by the distant low of cattle and the crunch of my sneakers on the dirt path. The air felt thick, charged with static. As I approached the weathered wooden structure, a sense of unease prickled at the back of my neck, that primal feeling of being watched. I stepped into the barn, fumbling for the light switch with shaking hands until I finally flicked it on. The bare bulb sputtered to life, dim and yellow, casting long, dancing shadows across the cluttered interior. Then I heard it. A faint scuffing sound, like something shifted in the dark at the back of the barn. Scritch, scratch. I quickly brushed this off as a rat or one of the barn cats. But as I started rummaging through Grandpa's disorganized tool chest, the silence was broken again. I distinctly heard what sounded like a low, raspy whisper. Not a rat, a voice. I spun towards the sound, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. There, crouched in the shadows of the far corner of the barn, was a shape. It looked human, but there was something unnatural about the way it folded in on itself, knees bent at sickening angles. In the feeble light, I caught a glimpse of matted fur over long limbs tipped with claws and eyes that glinted a feral yellow sheen. The thing was hunched over what looked like the gnawed carcass of a rabbit or maybe chicken. I could hear the wet, snapping sound of it working the meat with its teeth. Snap, crunch, slurp. Suddenly it twisted its head in my direction, the bones in its neck popping audibly. I'll never forget the sight of that thing's face. The features were hideously contorted, caught somewhere between man and animal, a snout that was too short, lips that were too human. The creature uttered a string of guttural, inhuman noises, mimicking speech but getting it wrong. Terror exploded through my veins. I dropped the flashlight and ran. Behind me, I heard a snarl and the skittering of claws on wood. I didn't dare look back. I just ran faster than I ever had in my life, hardly feeling my feet on the ground. The night air burned in my lungs as I flew down the path to the safety of the ranch house, maybe 50 yards away. I was certain that thing was right on my heels, its hot breath on my neck. Drawn by the screams, Grandpa came running from the tractor he was working on, and Grandma ran out onto the porch. It was then that I made it to the bottom step of the porch. My legs gave out, and I collapsed there, sobbing, babbling incoherently about the thing in the barn. Grandma knelt beside me, her arms encircling my trembling frame. "It's okay. You're safe now. We've got you." I looked over. Grandpa's face was etched with concern as he looked out over the dark landscape towards the barn. Then he looked at me. "What happened, son? What'd you see out there?" I struggled to catch my breath. The words basically jumbled out. In the barn, there was this thing. It wasn't human, Grandpa. It was like an animal, but it wasn't, and it was eating something. It looked right at me with those horrible yellow eyes. Grandma's grip tightened around me, her fingernails digging in. She looked up at Grandpa, a silent communication passing between them. He ran past us and reached for his rifle, which always stood propped up by the front door. "Stay here, boy. Mary, I'm gonna go check it out." Grandma tried to protest, fear in her voice. "John, be careful, if it's what we think it is." He nodded grimly, checking the chamber. "I know, but I have to make sure. I won't be long." With that, he strode away, the beam of his flashlight bobbing across the yard. Grandma held me close, whispering reassurances, but I could feel the tension in her body. She was shaking too. Careful, she brought me inside. The minutes crawled by, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, just when I thought I couldn't bear waiting any longer, we heard Grandpa's footsteps on the porch stairs. Heavy, slow. Grandma helped me to my feet, and we both turned to face him as he entered the pool of light by the door. He came back ashen, faced, and grim. The rifle hung slack in his grip, and his eyes held a haunted look I'd never seen before on such a strong man. Grandma hurried to his side, laying a hand on his arm. "What is it, John? What'd you find out there?" Grandpa shook his head slowly. "There is no sign of the creature, but in the back of the barn, right where the boy said he saw it." He swallowed hard. There were tufts of coarse, dark fur caught on some of the crates. Spatters of blood, too, are still fresh. Looked like something had been gnawed on, something else, just like he described. Grandma's hand flew to her mouth. "Dear Lord above." Grandpa met her gaze, and the look of understanding passed between them, tinged with a fear that sent a fresh shiver down my spine. He turned to me, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "You did well, son. Real good coming straight back to the house like that." His voice was steady, but I could see the unease in his eyes that terrified me more than anything else that happened that night. To see him as scared as I was meant we weren't safe. Grandma wrapped an arm around my shoulder, guiding me gently towards the kitchen. "Come on then. I'll fix you some hot cocoa, and we can forget all about it. Talk about something else." As we crossed over into the warmth and light of the kitchen, I glanced back over my shoulder towards the front door. Grandpa stood there, staring out the nearby window into the darkness, his rifle clenched tight in his hands. I swear I saw a flicker of something in his face. it wasn't just fear. It was like a grim kind of recognition. They didn't press me for further details that night. Grandma fussed over me, wrapping me in a quilt and pressing a steaming mug into my hands. Grandpa sat in his rocking chair, his expression distant and thoughtful, guarding the door. It was like they both knew something I didn't. A secret knowledge that hung heavy in the air with us. But over the next few days, as the shock lessened, my grandparents opened up more. It started one morning over breakfast. Grandma was frying eggs, the sizzle of the pan mingling with the soft crackle of the radio in the background. Grandpa sat at the table, cradling a mug of coffee in his weathered old hands. He cleared his throat, catching my attention. "Son," he began, his voice gravelly. "What you saw out there in the barn, it's not the first time something like that's happened around these parts." He exchanged a glance with Grandma. "There are stories, old stories about beings that can walk between the worlds of man and beast. You see, you're part Navajo from my side. I'm half Navajo and grew up on the reservation. The elders would warn us about them, said they could take on the form of any creature they chose." Grandma slid a plate of eggs in front of me, her hand lingering on my shoulder. "They're called Skinwalkers, witches who use dark magic to change shape." I felt a chill run through me, despite the warmth of the kitchen. "Skinwalkers? Like in those stories y'all used to tell me?" Grandpa nodded. "The very same. Never used to put much stock in those tales. Thought they were just superstition and fancy. But after what's been happening around the ranch, and now, with what you saw..." He trailed off, his gaze distant. Grandma picked up the thread. "They say skinwalkers are drawn to pain or suffering. They feed off it like some kind of twisted sustenance, and those things sow chaos everywhere they go, turning man, against the land itself." I pushed my eggs around my plate, my appetite gone. "But why here? Why is it bothering us?" Grandpa sighed. "I don't truthfully know, son. Maybe it's the drought, or the sudden sickness taking the cattle. Times of hardship like this bring out the darkness in the world, and sometimes that darkness takes on a life of its own." Over the next few days, in snatches of conversation and quiet moments, they shared more. Grandma told me about some early interactions with my grandpa's mother, a wise woman who knew the old ways and could see things others couldn't. "She used to say that there's a thin veil between our world and the other world," Grandma recounted as we shelled peas on the back porch. "And sometimes things can slip through from the other side. Things don't belong here." Then Grandpa spoke of his own encounter years back with something he couldn't explain. He'd been out in the far pasture repairing a fence when he'd heard a whisper on "the wind is less than Hashone, numbers greater than." A voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "It was calling my name," he said, his voice low and haunted. I looked up, and there on the hilltop I saw something. Looked like a man, but it moved wrong, all jerky and twisted. And its eyes, they were like pits, blacker than the darkest night. I ran back to the house and didn't go out again till daybreak. As the days turned into weeks, I started to piece together a picture of the world I'd never known existed. A world where lines between myth and reality blurred, where ancient things still hid away in the lonely places of the earth. Grandpa later taught me signs to look for and ways to protect myself. Sage and cedar hung over doorways and burned in smudge sticks. Prayers and chants passed down through generations showed me how to make offerings. These things, whether we like it or not, they're part of who we are, he explained. Part of the story of our people, and now, part of your story too. Admittedly, this terrifying experience turned into a very heartwarming one, really getting to know Grandpa and Grandma more, learning a lot about my Navajo background. But the shadow of that night never did quite leave me. It was always there, lurking at the edges of my thought, sometimes resurfacing in my dreams. On occasion, I'd wake up in the night, my heart pounding, certain I'd heard that awful whispering just outside my window. A whisper that sounded like my name. A few years later, I think Grandpa noticed I'd changed somewhat. One evening on one of my other annual visits, as the sun dipped low over the hills, he found me sitting on the back steps. I was staring out at the gathering dusk. "You know it's okay to be afraid," he said, lowering himself down beside me with a grunt. "You're thinking about it again, ain't you?" I nodded. "Sometimes I just can't stop thinking about it, Grandpa, wondering if it's still out there, wondering if I might see it again." I know. But you gotta remember you're not alone here. You've got your grandma and me, your mom and dad, and all the strength of our people behind you. That thing, whatever it is, it's strange, scary, even powerful, but it's nothing compared to the love and light we carry with us. I smiled, and he did too. "Do you think it'll ever come back, Grandpa? That, Skinwalker?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. But if it does, we'll be ready. I promise you that." That evening, we watched the sunset together, and in that moment, I felt less fear than I'd felt since I saw that thing in the barn. Story 2. Skinwalkers in the City from Feral Bumblebee. I want to preface this by saying I live in a heavily populated city in New England near Wampanoag Land. Most people think these things only live in the desert or deep woods, but they are wrong. Here's my 2 encounters with what I believe to be a skinwalker. Number 1. On one of my health kicks, I decided to go for a run at 3 a.m. It was a weeknight, so there was no vehicle traffic, and I didn't see a single other soul as I started my run. The streetlights hummed, casting orange pools of light on the empty pavement. I made it 3 blocks before something felt off. It felt like I was being stalked. You know that feeling? When the hair on your neck stands up and your reptilian brain screams, "Danger"? I wasn't wearing headphones because I'm dumb, but I'm not an idiot. If someone were coming up behind me, I would want to know about it. I came up to the 4th block. It was pitch black, out due to a lack of streetlights there, a perfect void. Before I could go any further, my gut straight up twisted in fear, and I did a complete about-face and started power walking back the way I came. After half a block, the silence was shattered. I heard this horrible howl. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a coyote. It was like multiple throats howling at the same time, and the sound was all distorted. Like a digital file corrupted by a virus, glitching and skipping. I've only heard that sound a few times in my life, and only when I was outside after dark. I wanted to run as fast as I could, but something told me that would only excite what was making that noise. Like when they say not to run from a dog because it triggers their hunting instinct. I forced myself to stay at a brisk walk the entire time, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. And I could feel it right at my back following my pace. Click, click, click. I heard claws on the pavement behind me. Once I hit my driveway, I finally broke into a run. I struggled to unlock my door for a moment, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped the keys. I had my house key on a chain around my neck. I made it inside just as I felt the thing come around the corner of the house. But I was too terrified to look at what it was, but I could feel it watching me through the peephole. Number 2. I drove my mom to her gun club for a chapter meeting one night. It was set way back in the woods, isolated, Their gun range is outdoors, and there's only one narrow trail in. If two vehicles try using the trail, one has to pull over in the woods to let the other pass. My mom asked if I wanted to come in, and I said absolutely not. I put on my headphones and sat back to take a nap. It was dark, and the only sounds were my music, crickets, and the very faint voices in the club. Out of seemingly nowhere, I heard what sounded like chanting. Rhythmic, low, guttural chanting. I paused my music and took off my headphones. I didn't hear anything like it from the club, so I shrugged it off and put my music back on. But then, I heard the chanting again. Much closer than before. It sounded like it was coming from right outside the car door. This time, I turned my music off and tossed my headphones in the back seat. The chanting then turned into heavy footsteps on the gravel around my car. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I checked all my mirrors and windows, but I couldn't make out anything in the darkness. I turned my headlights on to check, and I saw yellow, glowing eyes about 8 feet off the ground staring at me from the trees. Not reflecting light, glowing. Darkness pressed in around the car as I stared at the thing. Whatever it was, it looked teed off. I felt terror in the pit of my stomach. And then my mom and a few others came out of the clubhouse to go home. When I looked back at the tree line, the yellow eyes were gone. Story 3. Encounter in the woods with something from Farmer's Wife, 4,955. I live in a small town, a village actually, in Ontario, Canada. It's a small farming, kayaking, and hunting community. I've lived here my entire 21 years, and I've always been comfortable here. I've always had forests and woods around my home, and I'm no stranger to wildlife. Later in life, I ended up marrying a farmer, so obviously I've never had an issue with animals. I also had a run-in with a mountain lion on my grandparents' property when I was a kid, and took off on a 2-week hunt with my grandfather to hunt the thing down to keep my young siblings safe. During that hunt, this mountain lion found us before we found it, and it followed us a good 15 kilometers. So I know what it feels like to be stalked by a mountain lion. I know the feeling of being prey. My grandparents are indigenous, and therefore very superstitious. Words like Skinwalker and Wendigo were strictly forbidden. However, they would tell me stories about them and how to know that you were in the presence of one. My grandfather especially. He would take me outside, build a fire at dusk, sit down in his favorite lawn chair with his .22, shooting the birds and squirrels that tried to feast on my grandmother's garden. He would put sage leaves into the fire, sprinkle tobacco, which he got by unraveling his cigarettes that had a permanent place in his shirt pocket, and sprinkle it in and around the fire. In between puffs of his cigarettes and shots from his gun, he would tell me stories about these bad spirits. He would never say their names at the time. Saddle. My grandfather passed away 10 years ago, and I miss that man dearly. Now on to my story. When I started high school, I took on that rebellious, angsty teenager phase that most go through. I started to smoke along with my best friend, whom I will call Alex for the sake of the story. Alex and I were inseparable during our high school years. She basically lived at my house with me, as it was easier for us to sneak around with our booze and cigarettes out in the woods rather than in the city where her house was. We often filled up water bottles with booze, filled up Ziploc baggies with stolen cigarettes, and loaded them up in my four-wheeler, taking off into the woods to drink and smoke without our parents knowing. We had been doing this consistently for about 2 years before that day. It was late June, about a week after school had gotten out for the summer. as per usual, we packed up our things and headed out. It was a beautiful, sunny, summer day. We headed toward our favorite trail, where we usually stopped at the small creek in the middle to smoke and drink. On that day, the second my tires hit the dirt on the trail, I began to feel uneasy. At first, I could just brush it off, because I'm an anxious person. But the farther we went, the bigger and tighter the knot in my stomach became. I felt nauseous. My hair was standing up. I felt like there were eyes on me, and something was in hot pursuit of us. I wanted so badly to stop and ask Alex if she felt anything, but stopping felt like certain death. I felt her tap me on the shoulder, and even over the loud engine, I could hear her say, "Something's wrong." This sent even more chills down my spine than I already had. My eyes were darting around our surroundings like crazy, but I couldn't see a thing. And yet something was definitely watching us, hot on our heels. I knew it, and she knew it. This trail was extremely narrow, so we had no choice but to keep going until we got to the creek and were able to turn around. As we continued down the trail, Alex grabbed my arm and pointed up ahead. I followed her finger and watched in horror as the tops of the huge pine trees lining the trail moved left to right. One by one, only about 1 kilometer in front of us. Something massive was pushing them aside. I didn't know what to do at this point. There were eyes drilling into my back, and something that I couldn't see was shaking the trees in front of us. As I kept going, thinking about what in the world I was going to do to get us out of the situation, the smell of decomposition hit my nose. It was so strong it was as if I was standing directly over that fox that had been hit by a car, left baking in the August sun for 2 weeks. Rot, sulfur, death. I looked around even more, looking for a dead animal that might explain the smell, but I found none. My skin immediately prickled with goosebumps as the memories of my grandfather and me sitting around that fire flooded into my head. At first, I thought perhaps there was a mountain lion that had caught our trail because the feeling of being stalked felt eerily similar to that. But there was a certain difference about it. This felt darker than that, more evil. As soon as these memories flooded my brain, I remembered the conversation that Alex and I were having in my backyard right before we left. We'd been sitting on my back deck watching the farmer bale his hay in the field behind my house, talking about paranormal experiences and such. Then she began to talk about skinwalkers, repeatedly saying their name. I even said the name numerous times, as if my childhood had vanished from my memory. As if my grandfather had not told me time and time again not to say that name. As I came to this realization, I knew we had to leave fast. This thing did not want us here. Or maybe it did. Maybe it wanted a fresh, writhing, warm meal. Either way, we needed to get out and fast. I scanned the edges of the trail, looking for anywhere that was slightly wide enough that I could turn us around and get the heck out of Dodge. Up ahead, I saw a slight opening in the trail and a little bit of a clearing in the trees. I sped up, and as I did, we heard a scream. It sounded like a mix of a mountain lion, a fox, and a coyote, all in one. But something was wrong with it. It had a deep and guttural tone mixed with a scream. If you asked me to tell you what I thought pure evil sounded like, it would be that sound. As the scream died out, the trees began to move again. Faster this time. I made it to the clearing, jamming on the brakes and whipping the bike around. I turned us around and pushed that four-wheeler to its limits, tearing out of there. The entire way out of the woods and to the road, That screaming was erupting all around us in every direction. When we heard it in front of US, I swear I heard it laugh at us. I felt Alex's nails digging into my arm, but we had no choice but to keep going. As soon as we turned onto the main road, the smell disappeared. The feeling of being watched disappeared, and the sounds of nature returned. We stopped smack dab in the middle of the dirt road and lit up a cigarette. The moment the cigarette touched my lips, we heard that same scream but fainter, R followed by a loud crack and a thud. I hesitantly took a few steps back to look down the trail. What I saw was a giant pine tree, at least 4 feet in diameter, lying across the trail, maybe 700 feet in. Whatever it was had pushed it over to block our path. We quickly finished our smokes, put our helmets back on, and hightailed it home. We steered clear of that trail for a very long time. That was about 5 years ago, and I've only recently started to use that trail again. I'll never forget the feeling of the trail that day, and I'll never speak the name Skinwalker or Wendigo out loud again. I can't say for sure which it was that day, and if my grandfather were here, I would ask him. Unfortunately, I can't. Alex and I are still friends. We've spoken about this a few times since, but we've made sure not to use any names, especially since I've now told her the stories my grandpa told me. Whatever happened that day, I don't ever want to be in that situation again. If my grandfather was right, we narrowly escaped death that night. If I ever get that kind of feeling, I'll be immediately noping out. Story 4. True Camping Horror in Switzerland from Climber04. I'm one 8-year-old girl working in an indoor climbing hall. It's basically a large warehouse with a bunch of different walls to climb, and it's my job to make sure all of the guests are strapped into their harnesses correctly. This is where I met my boyfriend. He, 2 other colleagues, and I decided to take a week off work, going to Switzerland to do some climbing and wild camping. Since we live in southeastern Germany, it was a 6-hour drive to where we would start our trek. We had a bunch of camping and climbing gear that we distributed evenly, though the 2 guys in our group ended up carrying most of our stuff. We had a great couple of days hiking, climbing, late-night bonfire discussions, and some of the most beautiful landscapes you'll ever see. The Alps are truly majestic and beautiful. On one of our last nights there, like at every proper bonfire, we started talking about legends, myths, and monsters we'd heard of. The other girl, Laura, wanted to change the subject. She's Wiccan and did not want to attract anything eerie. But we didn't listen. In retrospect, we should have. We talked about the legends of European monsters since we have a bunch of them in Germany alone. We ended up laughing them off in the end, deciding to go back to our tents when it started to get too cold for comfort. We had 2 tents separated by couples. As I heard Laura and her boyfriend giggling and probably getting a little frisky in the other tent, I cuddled up with my boyfriend, who was already half asleep, mumbling about how he didn't get any coffee all day. Eventually, we went to sleep in the warm embrace of my sleeping bag. I awoke only a few hours later. Just as I was about to groggily look at my phone to check the time, I felt my boyfriend's grip on me tighten. I froze looking up at him. He was wide awake, staring at the ceiling of our tent with a horrified look on his face. I heard a quiet whimpering in the silence of the night. And at the same time, I noticed how quiet it really was around us. No chirping of crickets. Not even the annoyingly loud owls I usually heard at night. Just the sound of soft whimpering outside. I felt anxious and confused, suddenly wide awake. I kept staring at my boyfriend, who slowly turned to face me and mouthed some words. I was eventually able to make out what he was trying to say. Quiet, machete. I glanced at the bag next to my head and slowly started to open it as quietly as I could. As soon as I was about to grab the machine, I heard a loud grunt. Then there was something that sounded like a low whistle. My eyes grew wide, and in my head, I was screaming every prayer I knew. I prayed to Mary, God, Jesus, the archangels, and to anyone who could help us. I didn't know what that thing was outside. A man, a boar, a cow. Maybe there was nothing else it could be in this region of Europe. Most dangerous animals had been chased away or killed off long ago. I heard heavy footsteps outside the tent, walking towards the tent my friends were in. Thump, thump, thump. I wanted to do something, but I couldn't. My boyfriend was gripping me so tightly that I ended up having bruises on my arm later. I held my breath, and then I heard something rip. Laura screamed. My boyfriend jumped up, grabbed the machete, and stumbled out of the tent. Laura's boyfriend was screaming now too. I managed to crawl out of the tent just in time to see a huge, dark silhouette bolt back into the woods. It was human-like, but features like its limbs and head were off too long, too rigid. The other tent was almost ripped to shreds, and our climbing gear lay strewn around our campsite. Laura was shaking, and I ran over to her, hugging her tightly, making sure she was okay. The boys stood next to us, still on high alert. All of us were in shock. The guys ended up lighting the bonfire again. None of us slept another wink all night. We sat around the campfire wrapped in our sleeping bags, not saying a word. I flinched at every sound I heard. Laura was sitting upright on the ground with her eyes closed, trying to breathe properly again. My boyfriend held my hand with one of his and the machete with the other. The other guy was just staring into the fire. As soon as the sun shone, we packed our things and made our way back to the car. Luckily, we were scheduled to go back the next day, so it wasn't too far on the car ride home. Laura told us all about how the region we stayed in used to be a sort of breeding ground for witches who would hold ceremonies to keep away demons. The natives of the land would make sacrifices to the gods way back when. It's said that in the weeks around the summer solstice, demons would roam the land. I do believe there are such things as demons. I have no idea if this was one, though. The world is crazy, and even hundreds of kilometers away from things like skinwalkers, campers still unsafe from forest entities. Story 5. Terrifying Night Under the Stars from H.T. Glorious. I want to tell you about this crazy thing that happened to me when I was a kid. I'm in my 32nd now, but this one experience from childhood still freaks me out whenever I think about it. Back when I was 13, my class went on this trip to a Navajo Reservation. It was supposed to be some sort of cultural learning experience, to teach us about Navajo history and traditions. To be honest, I was just excited to get out of the classroom for a bit. We all piled into this big old bus and started the long drive to the reservation. It was me, 3 of my best friends, the rest of our class, and a few adults, which included the school counselor and a couple of parents who volunteered to chaperone. The drive felt like it took forever, but we kept ourselves entertained. "Hey, do you think we'll see any wild animals out there?" my friend Jack asked. "I hope so," Sarah chimed in. "I want to see a coyote or something." "So long as there's no snakes," Mike grumbled. "I hate snakes." We laughed and joked around, speculating about what the reservation might be like. None of us had ever been to one before. We were city kids. When we finally arrived, I remember being struck by how vast and empty everything seemed. The reservation was huge, with all these wide open spaces and rugged landscapes. It was so different from the city we were used to. Whoa, look at those mountains out there, Jack pointed out the window. Those aren't mountains, they're mesa, Sarah corrected him. She was the smarter one and knew it, turning her into quite the know-it-all sometimes. As we stepped off the bus, I felt a sudden sense of isolation. We really were, out in the middle of nowhere, far away from anything familiar. But I was with my friends, so I didn't feel too nervous. The school counselor, Miss Johnson, gathered us all together. All right, everyone, listen up. We're going to be learning a lot about Navajo culture this afternoon. I want you all to be respectful and pay attention to our hosts. We all nodded, but I could tell we were itching to explore. The first thing on our agenda was a meeting with some of the Navajo elders. They greeted us warmly, leading us to this big open space where we all sat in a circle. The elders began to share stories about Navajo history and traditions. At first, I was bored. I was 13, listening to people way older than me talk about history, and that wasn't exactly my idea of fun. But then one of the elders started to talk about Navajo folklore and legends. I perked up a bit. I wasn't the only one either. Because Jack, always. The curious on E raised his hand. Do you have any scary stories, like about monsters or ghosts? A couple of the elders exchanged glances. There was an uncomfortable silence for a moment. Finally, one of them spoke up. There are many stories in Navajo culture, but some are not meant to be shared with outsiders. We should focus on the stories that teach us important lessons about our way of life. That just piqued our interest even more. The idea that there were certain stories that outsiders like us weren't even allowed to hear. Sadly, the subject was changed quickly. They told us more about Navajo art and music, even taught us a few words in their language. As the day went on, we explored more of the reservation. We saw some traditional Navajo homes called hogans and even got to try some authentic Navajo food. It was really cool. After a few hours, it was finally time to head back to the bus. I sat with my friends as usual. We began to talk about all the things we'd seen and learned as everyone else climbed aboard, and the adults were checking things before leaving. Settling into our seats, Jack turned to us with a frustrated look on his face. Can you believe those elders wouldn't tell us the scary stories? He complained. I mean, what's the point of learning about Navajo culture if we don't get to hear about the cool stuff? Sarah rolled her eyes. Maybe they just didn't want to scare us. We're just kids. Come on, Jack scoffed. We can handle it. Did you see the way they reacted when I asked about monsters and ghosts? They're definitely hiding something. What do you think they're hiding, Jack? I asked. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. I've heard stories about these things called Skinwalkers. They're like evil shapeshifters or something. I bet the elders know all about them, but they just don't want to talk about it. Skinwalkers? Mike repeated with his eyes wide. Just the name sounds creepy. Yep, and apparently they can turn into animals and stuff, and they're supposed to be really dangerous, Jack said, clearly enjoying the effect his words were having on us, especially Mike. Sarah shook her head. Jack, K, that's just a bunch of superstition. There's not actually such a thing as skinwalkers. Legends like that just serve as cautionary tales. You don't know that, Jack argued. The Navajo have all sorts of legends and stuff. Just because the elders didn't want to talk about it doesn't mean it's not real. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. I didn't know what to believe, but the idea of skinwalkers was definitely interesting and unsettling. Maybe we shouldn't talk about it, Mike suggested. The elders probably had a good reason for not wanting to share those stories. Don't be such a baby, Jack teased. It's just a story. What's the worst that could happen? As if on cue, the bus suddenly lurched to a stop. The engine sputtered and died, and we all looked around in confusion. What's going on? Mike asked, peering out the window. Miss Johnson stood up at the front of the bus. Well, looks like we're having some mechanical issues, she said, trying to sound calm. Everyone just sit tight while we figure this out. She and the other chaperones got off the bus to take a look at the engine. We all waited anxiously, wondering what was going to happen. After a while, Miss Johnson returned to the bus, looking worried. I'm afraid the bus isn't going to start, she said. We're going to have to call your parents to come pick you up. We'll also get a hold of someone to come fix the bus. A murmur of concern went through the bus. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere. Miss Johnson and the other chaperones started making phone calls, trying to reach parents to pick us up. However, some of them were unreachable or unable to come till morning. My group of friends and I happened to meet that criteria too. My parents didn't even pick up, while Mike, Jack, and Sarah's parents were apparently busy till tomorrow. I know for a fact Jack's parents were out of town, but I wasn't sure about Sarah and Mike's. I remember feeling a growing sense of dread as the reality of our situation sank in. Were we going to have to spend the night out here on the reservation? I could ask the other kids' parents for a ride, but I didn't really know them. It was after this that the thing started to get really weird. Jack's words about skinwalkers kept echoing in my head as we sat there on the bus waiting for someone to fix it. I tried to push the thoughts away, but the more I tried, the more they seemed to take hold. Over the next few hours, the other kids' parents began to show up. And a couple of hours after that, as we were all waiting outside with bottles of wate, the last of the parents came to pick up the last of the child who would go home that night. For us stragglers, Miss Johnson came up to us and said, "I've got some good news. Your parents will be here in the morning, including you, HT," she pointed at me. I finally managed to get a hold of them. However, we're not going anywhere tonight until tomorrow. We'll be staying in the bus. One of the other straggler kids spoke up. "Can't we stay in one of the buildings on the reservation?" Miss Johnson sighed. "No, unfortunately there's limited indoor space available." Then Jack spoke up. "There's no room to sleep on that bus. Can we camp outside instead? Enjoy the scenery and the stars?" Sarah chimed in with him. "Yeah, that sounds like fun." Miss Johnson stood there for a moment thinking about it. "Well, we did pack blankets on the bus just in case. Tell you what, if y'all want to camp out here next to the bus, you can do that, but I'm going to be out here with you, and anyone who wants to sleep on the bus can do so." A mixture of excitement and fear rippled through me. Camping outside on this reservation after everything Jack said about skinwalkers? Sarah nudged me. "This is going to be awesome, like a real adventure." Jack agreed. Mike seemed to be the only one with reservations about staying on the reservation. And despite my feelings about the situation, I eventually found myself getting caught up in the enthusiasm. I mean, it did sound cool, camping out under the stars. Miss Johnson continued. "Everyone needs to stay together and follow instructions, whether you're on the bus or just outside. I'm going to ask the elders if they have anything that might help out." We began to go back into the bus, grabbing the aforementioned blankets and anything else that would help out with our camp. Miss Johnson came back with one of the elders. Apparently, they did have some tents we could borrow and some spare pillows. Heck, they even brought us out some snacks. The elder and Miss Johnson helped to set up a small fire. After that, the elder bade us good night and left. Miss Johnson and my friends and I gathered around the fire. We could feel the night getting colder on our backs. As the others talked about school or gossip and even homework, I felt more and more uneasy. It started with small things, like the way the shadows seemed to flicker and dance at the edge of the firelight, or the way the wind whistled through the trees nearby, sounding almost like whispers. I glanced at my friends, wondering if they felt weird too, but they seemed oblivious, caught up in conversation. As the fire began to die down a bit, Miss Johnson stood up and stretched. "All right, kids, bedtime. We've got a long day tomorrow." We all grumbled a bit, but we began to pile into our tents anyway. Doors and window flaps kept open so we could see and talk to each other. Even as I lay down, sleep just wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, the creepy thoughts of monsters from Navajo folklore came to mind, especially the Skinwalker. At some point in the night, I heard a twig snap somewhere in the dark beyond our campsite. Snap. I sat up, my heart pounding. "Did you hear that?" I whispered to Sarah that I was sharing my tent. She mumbled something incoherent and rolled over, already asleep, apparently. I strained my ears listening for any other sounds. At the moment, all I could hear was the wind and the occasional pop from the low, dying fire. I was about to lie back down, but then I caught sight of something. A pair of eyes. Glowing eyes staring out at me from the shadows. I froze. My breath catches in my throat. The eyes blinked. Once. Twice. Then disappeared. I rubbed my eyes, wondering if I had imagined it or if something was stuck in them, but then I heard another twig snap. It was closer this time. I nudged Sarah, feeling much more urgent than before. "Sarah, wake up. There's someone out there." She sat up, blinking sleepily. "What? What are you talking about?" I pointed to the shadows where I'd seen the eyes. I saw something. Eyes glowing in the dark. She frowned, peering out into the night. "I don't see anything. Probably just a nocturnal animal or something." I suddenly heard someone sit up in the other tent. Apparently, Jack was awake. "Did you say eyes? Like glowing animal eyes?" I nodded, my heart still pounding. Jack scrambled to his feet, grabbed a flashlight, and crawled out of his tent. "I'm going to go check it out." "Jack, no," Sarah hissed. "Miss Johnson said we have to stay by the bus together." But Jack was already heading towards the edge of the campsite, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark. I glanced at Sarah, then to the other tent, seeing Mike now awake, looking just as scared as I felt. We couldn't just let Jack go off on his own, so we went after him. Footsteps crunching on the dry ground. "Jack, wait up," I called, trying to keep my voice low. But Jack would not slow down. He kept going, his flashlight sweeping back and forth across the landscape. Then we heard something. A low growl. The kind of sound that instantly sends shivers down your spine. All of us froze, including Jack, whose flashlight beam now pointed towards the sound. There in the light we saw a creature which could only come from a nightmare. It was huge, easily the size of a wolf, but it looked very, very wrong. Its fur was patchy and mangy, and its face wasn't that of a wolf. It was flat, human-like snout. The creature stared at us with glowing yellow eyes, lips pulled back in a snarl. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Skinwalker," Jack breathed, his face pale. The creature suddenly looked extremely mad, even more so than before, its claws digging into the earth as it took a step towards us. We stumbled back, Jack's flashlight shaking about in his hands. Then, from behind us, we heard Miss Johnson's voice. "Kids, what are you doing over there?" We spun around the beam, which now landed on Miss Johnson's face. Then, all four of us turned back around where the creature had been. It was no longer there. Miss Johnson hurried over to us, her face etched with worry. "What's going on? Why aren't you in your tent sleeping?" We all started to talk at once, voices high and panicked. We told her about the eyes we saw in the dark, about that monster we'd seen. Miss Johnson's face grew even more concerned. She hustled us back to the campsite where some of the other kids were now looking out from the windows of the bus. Miss Johnson alone searched the area around the campsite. We were terrified watching her out there, wondering if that thing was going to drag her away. Thankfully, she saw no sign of the creature. Miss Johnson tried to convince us it had probably been a coyote or another animal, but I knew what we'd seen. We all knew. We grabbed our blankets, abandoned our tents, and slept cramped in the bus that night. Miss Johnson kept the door shut and the windows down to circulate some cooler air, so every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves I heard out there sent fresh waves of terror through me. That night seemed to go on forever. I don't think I slept at all. When the sun finally came up, it felt like a miracle. Our parents showed up at record time, thankfully, and I was more than eager to get off this reservation and get back home. Miss Johnson, before we left, tried to ask us more questions about the night before, but we didn't want to talk about it anymore. We didn't even want to think about it. As I climbed into my parents' car and slowly pulled away, I caught a glimpse of something in our rearview mirror. A lone figure standing at the edge of the reservation, watching us leave. I blinked, and I swear it was gone just like that. Honestly, I think that trip changed me. Changed all my friends. Like it opened up a door that shouldn't have been opened. One that's impossible to close. A door that told us that there are monsters out there. And if that bit of folklore happened to be true, what other folklore was real? We live in a world filled with things that defy explanation. When it comes to skinwalkers, it's best left to the elders. If you enjoyed these stories and survived this marathon, let us know in the comments below. Do you think these were just wild animals or something much darker? If you have a story of your own, send it to us at truehauntinglog@gmail.com. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more true horror. Until next time, stay safe out there.